Well, Phil's certainly ahead of the Senior Bowl, and we'll talk about the Senior Bowl before he gets away. Good morning, Phil. How you doing?
Good morning, gentlemen. Hope you're doing well. Merry Christmas to you both.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you.
We'll talk about this book and the Senior Bowl a little bit. First of all, I listened so much to the defensive ability of Clemson's line compared to Auburn and everything. Talk a little bit about what you think Alabama's going to have to do offensively to get the job done against Clemson.
Yeah, that defensive front is one of the strengths of the Clemson team. There's no question about that. And, last year in the game, Alabama actually blocked those guys pretty effectively in the run game at different times, especially early in that game. So I think for Bama, it's imperative that they're able to run the football, try to get Bo Scarborough, Damian Harris, and the like into the secondary, that second and third level of the defense, make those defensive backs and linebackers tackle them. But I think you'll also see Alabama try to get the ball out of Jalen Hurts' hands fairly quickly. In other words, when you watch Hurts and you watch Kelly Bryant from Clemson, primarily they drop back, they look, basically go through one read, and then their default option is to take off and run. And so, I think in this case, you're going to see Alabama try to utilize a quicker passing game, try to run the football, and have some production on first and second down, because we saw what happened last year when Bama was behind the sticks. They ended up going 2 for 15 on third down, continually gave the football back to Clemson. That was the difference in the game. So Bama's got to be productive on first and second down, and the way to do that is to run the ball and to throw it quickly and get it out of Hurts' hands sooner rather than later. Good point.
We're talking with Phil Savage. Phil, I've heard a lot of people say, well, they don't have Deshaun Watson this year, so Clemson's not as good. I said, well, you don't have Reuben Foster and Tim Williams as well. Talk about Kelly Bryant. I think sometimes people try to compare him to Deshaun Watson. I think what Dabo Swinney and those offensive guys have done with Kelly Bryant to get back to this game after losing Deshaun Watson, this guy must have a pretty good skill set. Talk about Kelly Bryant for our listeners, please.
Yeah, Barry, you bring up a good point. I mean, it's the same programs, it's the same uniforms, the same coaches, but some different cast of characters. And, Bama doesn't have the 7 NFL draft picks on defense, and Clemson doesn't have Deshaun Watson. But I tell you this, Kelly Bryant, he's had his ups, he's had his downs, but primarily, especially the last part of the year, he's been on an upward ascent. The arrow is pointing in the right direction. He's bigger than Watson. He's probably 6'4", about 220, 225 pounds. So he's a more physical, more rugged runner. And as I mentioned a moment ago, he's throwing the ball very quickly, going through a first read, and then his option is to take off and run. And I think that's going to be the biggest concern for Alabama, is just being able to mix up their rush packages. Sometimes I'm sure they'll use a contained, what they call muddled rush, and force him to stay in the pocket. Other times I'm sure they'll try to bring pressure and move him out of the pocket intentionally. But he's a physical runner. He broke a tackle against Auburn and ultimately ran it in the end zone. That was the difference-making score in that game way back early in the season. And then, of course, at the end of the year against Miami, he started off that game 11 for 11. So they have really catered to his strengths, which are to get the ball out quickly to the intermediate area of the field, and or take off and run with it. He has not been that effective throwing the ball way downfield, but the short to intermediate passing game, he's been fairly accurate in that regard. And I tell you that, we mentioned the defensive line a moment ago. I think the other strength of the Clemson team is this set of receivers. All of us know who Hunter Renfrow is, the slot receiver for Clemson that, scored the game-winning touchdown last year. But they've got other receivers, Ray McLeod and Deion Kane and others, that are also capable playmakers. And this is a matchup offense. They try to pick out the one-on-one and then maximize either their size or their quickness against your defensive back individual defender and just throw it up for grabs at times.
Phil, one more question. What did I hear people say? Well, you didn't play offensively as well against the Auburns, the LSU's, the Mississippi States, and those guys can maybe match up with Alabama physically. What did they do on defense? Did they stack up the line up there and say we're going to make Jalen throw the ball? What did those guys do defensively that maybe Clemson will try to copy to try to stop Alabama offensively?
Yeah, LSU for sure played a lot of man-to-man on the outside, and they did try to crowd the box and contain Jalen as a runner. Mississippi State did more of a mixture. They relied on their defensive front, Jeffrey Simmons, to disrupt the inside of the Bama offensive line. And then Auburn, Auburn had the defensive front as well with the pass rush. And, that's the key for this Alabama team in my mind is they've got to have success on first down. To me, that means mixing it up. I think Jalen has a reasonable chance, a better chance to be effective as a passer if they're willing to throw it some on first down. Usually the Clemson front and coverage is not as complex on first down as it can be on third down. And so to me, that's going to be one of the key elements of this game is if the Tide can stay ahead of the chains, 3rd and 4, 3rd and 3, 3rd and 2, they're a different offense in that situation than they are when it's 3rd and 9 or 3rd and 11. And I tell you another thing that happened last year's game, we tend to forget about this, but Bama had a number of penalties, false starts, and the like that put them at 1st and 15. Or 2nd and 12. And those were pivotal penalties that really worked against Alabama. So they've got to play as clean as possible offensively.
Well, before we ask you about just a word about Georgia and them, I've always believed in doing something you hadn't done before, which I guess is stupid, but that's what I always did. Do you see either team spreading it with their offense a little bit, or do you see either team playing wide a lot, going to flare pass to the outside, doing a little something different than they have been doing or not?
Coach, I think that most teams will always throw a wrinkle out there. You've got all this extra time, although with this recruiting early signing date, I'm not sure how much time they've really had to spend on each other. I think the coordinators have, but the assistant coaches, the position coaches probably have not. But I do think we'll see some different wrinkles from both sides. I think they'll look at the last two games in 15 and 16 and explore, the areas where they think, hey, maybe there's something we could do formationally to hurt the other side. But to me, this game's still going to come down to can Alabama's offensive line at least get a tie against Clemson's defensive front, and can Alabama's secondary hold up against this group of wide receivers, because it's not just one guy. They've got 3 or 4, sometimes probably in this case 5 or 6 capable receivers that they put on the field. So to me, those are the two pivotal matchups in this game for that Alabama to win. They're going to have to at least get a tie in those two areas.
Kirby has talked about, I'll switch over real quick because I want to ask you about the Senior Bowl and about your book, made the statement that Baker Mayfield is better than Johnny Football. And I know that Baker Mayfield is high on everybody's list. Talk a little bit about how difficult it is to defend a guy, if that's the case, like Baker Mayfield.
Well, he's one of those satellite-type players, and I'll relate it to basketball for you guys. He's a point guard, and when you lay off of him, he can shoot the three. When you go after him, he can dish the ball off.
Good point.
He's really good at it. He's one of those players that has an instinctive flair. He sees all the cars on the freeway. He's not locked into one receiver. He can see the full field, distribute the ball. Incredible competitor. And he has really been the focal point for Oklahoma. Honestly, I'm not sure how good they are on defense. The other 3 teams in the playoffs are all ranked in the top 10 in total defense. Oklahoma, I think, is like 57th in total defense. They're down in the 50s. So they are definitely a sort of a run and gun type of team. They're going to try to outscore Georgia, and for Georgia, they're in a little bit of the same situation that Alabama is. They want to control the ball, control the clock, play keep away, because they know their best defense is going to be an effective offense. And I think that's true for both Alabama and Georgia in these two semifinal games.
Barry.
We're talking with Phil Savage. Phil, one more question about Alabama. Do you think getting Mack Wilson, all these linebackers back, I don't know how healthy they are. I don't know if you've been out to practice. It seems like maybe Alabama didn't have as good a pass rush here lately. Will that pick up, and is that critical for Alabama to be able to get to the quarterback and disrupt the quarterback in this particular game to be successful?
Well, two things I would say. First of all, Clemson does, for the most part, they get the ball out quickly. So it's hard to get to the quarterback with just your pure pass rush coming off the edge. Can you impact the quarterback, affect him? Absolutely. But he typically doesn't stand back there. Kelly Bryant, I'm talking. He doesn't just stand back there and wait all day long. That ball's either coming out or he's going to take off and run with it. But I do think that the depth of Bama's linebacker group, especially on the outside, will be better and improved with Terrell Lewis and Christian Miller now getting essentially 2.5-3 weeks worth of work in before this Clemson game. Of course, you know, they made it back for the Auburn game. They got a dose of play time, but they had not played all season long. That was a tough way to try to come back and get in the mix. So I think they'll be better. Of course, we learned of this news yesterday with Dylan Moses being down. That's problematic because, you know, Sean Dion Hamilton was the guy that handled all the signals before he got hurt against LSU. And then Dylan Moses had really taken over that role these last few football games. And if he's out, that's going to put the onus on Mack Wilson and Rashawn Evans to handle the signals. I would suspect that Minka Fitzpatrick would be in the mix with that as well from his safety position. So that's certainly something to keep an eye on because, you know, we know Bama's got the physical ability to do it. And like Coach Saban says, we need to all be doing it the right way or all be doing it the wrong way in terms of the calls and the communication. And that's a significant part of Bama's alignment and production on that side of the ball.
Yeah. I know the Senior Bowl is coming up, and that's your deal. You want to just mention a little bit about that before we talk about your book?
Yeah, Coach, we've got over 100 invites out there. We can bring 110 players to the game. So far, we've got 94 commitments, 94 acceptances for the game. Wow. So it's shaping up really well. I think the messaging of the Senior Bowl and what we've been able to try to communicate to agents and players and the college coach is that the Senior Bowl is not the end of the college career. It's the beginning of the pro career. And we're going to have something happen here that has not occurred before. Royce Freeman, the running back from Oregon, you guys are familiar with him. He skipped his team's bowl game last Saturday, but he has plans and intends to play in the Senior Bowl at the end of January. So I thought that was really interesting. Of course, we're seeing more players skip out on their bowl games when they're not in the playoffs. I think, unfortunately, it's a trend that we're going to see continue. But I do think people are now understanding that the Senior Bowl really kicks off the pre-draft run-up for these players and the importance of making a first impression off the field and a lasting impression on the field when they're down here in Mobile.
Well, certainly your book with Coach and Coach of New England, and from what I have heard, people are reading it everywhere. Talk a little bit about your book and exactly how that really took place.
Yeah, Coach, the book came out, of course, at the end of August. It's been out there all fall, and you know it's really has sold well, particularly across the state. Yesterday was my 58th book appearance during the season, somewhere across the Southeast. So, you know, it does circulate around Alabama football, having grown up down here in Mobile during Coach Bryant's era, and then working for Nick Saban and Bill Belichick in Cleveland when those two were just getting started really in terms of their Hall of Fame careers. And then, being fortunate enough to come back and be the color analyst for the last 9 years. But, of course, we wrote the book. It had been 7 years. Bama had won 4 national titles. And my co-writer, Ray Glear, just said, you can bring such a unique perspective because you can look at it through the culture of Alabama football, through those days in Berea, Ohio with the original Browns, and then, being the analyst for the radio broadcast, you could link all those things together. So that's what we did. People seem to have really enjoyed the book. I think that it'll stand the test of time because it's not tied to a given season or a given game. It's really just tied to the overall concept of Alabama Crimson Tide football, and it's just from my own perspective in terms of how and why Bama has been so effective and so successful under Nick Saban and the different staffs he's had. I mean, I think that's a tremendous tribute to his ability that the coaches change, the players change, but Alabama stays right at or near the top of college football with him being in charge.
Phil, where do people go get it? Where do people go get the book, Phil?
Yeah, so.
Well, you can pick it up virtually anywhere at all the major outlets, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. I tell you, for people in your listening area, Birmingham, the Alabama Booksmith, they have signed copies of the book there that they've kept in inventory all season long. And so it's, and of course, Amazon, you can order it online, which is probably the easiest thing to do for people that are trying to get a gift here right before Christmas.
Phil, one last question. Lane Kiffin last night, his team looked really good, signs a 10-year deal. This guy must be a marketing genius. That's all you saw last night was Lane Kiffin all over the screen. Just talk about that job that he's done down there at Florida Atlantic.
Yeah, the Lane train has rolled all season long. And I tell you, I was at a couple different schools that had coaches that had come from FAU. And they said, boy, Lane's going to find out he doesn't have much talent down there. We didn't leave him much. So he took the pieces that were there, added some players, obviously, through the off-season and through the junior college route. But they won 11 games at Florida Atlantic. I think he did a more impressive job with that football team than he did even at Alabama because, the expectation is Alabama's got good players. You put them in the right spot, you can win. At FAU, they really had to be creative in terms of turning that program around. So life is looking good for Lane Kiffin right now. A 10-year deal in Boca Raton. There's a lot of guys like to retire to that job.
Hey, I'll tell you this. If I was coaching, I wouldn't really want his players. I'd want the guy that gets them in school.
You're probably right.
Able to get him in school.
Lane's going to get him a suntan today. He's going to be laying out by the pool during National Signing Day.
Yeah. He get him in school. I'll tell you one thing. He gets them right in school. When they transfer, they get in school.
Well, I tell you what, when the president is as vocal in the support for Lane as he's been, it came out yesterday that their applications for next fall are up 38%. And they're giving football all the credit for that.
Sure.
The coach and the president are tied at the hip, and it's been a great partnership so far.
They've got a nice campus. I've been there. I've done a couple of basketball games. They're a very, very pretty campus. Not very big, but it's nice.
You got the Saban effect in Tuscaloosa. You got the Kiffin effect in Boca Raton. They'll be building buildings down there, Phil. Go buy some land.
They'll play each other.
Buy some land down there. Thanks, Phil.
All right, guys, be good. Appreciate it. Have a wonderful holiday, and we'll catch up again.